Hey there. I am Meredith, and I am an intuitive and an astrologer based out of the mountains of North Carolina. Today, I'm going to take a little look at Saturn and Pisces with you guys. So let's take a look. Oops, let's see. Here we go. So I wanted to make one video about Saturn in Pisces and Pluto in Aquarius, both, that has more to do with our evolution compared to like what's going on in the world. And I will make some world predictions with this. Those will be like separate two videos for Saturn in Pisces and Pluto in Aquarius. So I just wanted to share that with you. So this lecture, however, is about some helps for us, our opportunity, our evolution, our development. If you're on a path of awakening in this life and you feel that, you know, there's really something else going on, or there's something like at a soul level that you're meant to experience here, maybe this lecture would be for you. Okay, so this is an overview of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to look at Saturn a little bit different from the way that Saturn is normally viewed, I think, especially within like conspiracy woo circles. And we are going to look at the Virgo-Pisces axis, how it comes together and creates like a bigger whole. We're going to look at some of the shadow aspects of Pisces, how it shows up in our world today, our spiritual opportunity presented in scripture. I kind of jacked a couple of Bible verses because I felt like they were really relevant to this. We're going to go into dual transits, like transits with Gemini, Libra, and in this case, Pisces, and some polarities that we could encounter in that way. We're going to talk about some Jungian concept, and then we're going to talk about Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, and then we'll end. We'll end with a little reflection of just like for you to maybe write down and think about what happened for you through these Pisces transits that we've been experiencing. So Saturn in conspiracy woo circles, gets compared a lot to Kronos, which is the archetype that is like the father of time. In myth, Kronos ate his own children, right? So there's a lot of like bleed over and comparison between Kronos and Saturn in astrology and in the conspiracy woo world. And we will look at that aspect of Saturn for the next lecture, and I'll show you guys a overview of what I'm going to be talking about in the next one too. But so Saturn for this video is actually going to be looked at in a positive light, because we really can't have an earthly experience and have like an experience in matter without Saturn, at least not in this universe. You know, it's the planet that represents materialization, you know, kind of like that force that causes things to want to, you know, come into matter. It's also it's an energy that really does have to do with like maturity and like, you know, watching how things mature and change over time, because it does have to do with time. But we are going to look at this planet for this lecture as something that is helping us rather than something that is harming us. Although there is definitely evidence for both in our world. And, you know, I went through my Saturn return, let's see, you know, at the beginning of 2021 was when it was exact, and then also a little bit in 2020. And what I realized was that obviously Saturn is not all bad. I feel much more grounded and have like a much more solid foundation than when I started. And if I had to do it over again, I would go through exactly what Saturn put me through for my Saturn return. So it can be helpful, especially if we're not resenting it. So this is a lecture that I'm going to do next on sort of the more like holy war, like religious type aspect of Saturn and Pisces. So we're going to talk about all these things, the hexagram, the cube, Kronos, the Old Testament God or Yahweh, or the sort of like dark father, the one world religion that I suspect. And we're going to talk a little bit about Noahide laws. I recognize that this might not be the best time, or is arguably the best time to talk about that. And we're going to talk about techno-spirituality and sort of like this strange transhumanist religion that seems to be more and more materializing in our world. And then we'll also talk about theosophy and how it connects to the UN, the age of Aquarius. So we'll talk about all of those things and more on the next lecture. So Virgo is a sign that does have to do with like the so below component of the as above, so below, right? And I know that this lecture is on Saturn and Pisces, but honestly, I think that we can't really have Pisces without Virgo. And a lot of people, especially when they're on a spiritual path, want to sort of jump into the most complex and the most vast and the most potentially confusing information for our human. But the Virgo Pisces axis really reminds us, I think, in our spiritual development and in our evolution to like chop wood and carry water, where in Virgo we analyze and we zoom in on all of the pieces, where in Pisces where we are able to appreciate more the whole. This is the axis of service. And so everybody who watches this, probably who watches my channel, is a person who wants to help other people, right? But there comes a time when helping others is actually like at the detriment of yourself, right? So we'll see like that martyrdom is going to be, I think, discouraged. And I think that it's a big warning not to believe anything that's like posture, like that's sort of like proselytized as a savior. Yeah, so as always, you know, I come back to, with transits in Pisces, I come back to the sign of Virgo because it's helpful when there is chaos, and we'll talk about chaos and order here in a minute, but it is helpful to have sort of like routines that ground you, that you do daily, that like bring you back to like your whatever your personal mission or your personal you know, your personal why is, you know, it helps you to come back to that. So so these are the shadow aspects of Pisces in our world today, just some of them. You know, I saw this thing that if you go on Google in Canada and you like basically type in like, I would like to commit suicide, you know, then you can, and you like, they'll send you to a place and they'll give you a number to call. And then, you know, pretty soon that's it. So I know that everybody has a different perspective on that, and that like sometimes you know, if conditions are really, really hard for people, be it in pain or be it then who am I to say that it's not right? But it's just, it's a little interesting when we get into like suicide as a service, which is kind of, that's kind of the Agenda 2030, like, you know, this as a service, this as a service, this as a service. So we're renting like our belongings and stuff like that, right? So I just really, I feel that this is moving in a direction where it's like suicide as a service, like don't want to live anymore? Sure, just, you know, give us a call. And it's very, I know that times are hard. Like I do know that. And I've also been extremely personally in my own life have been through long bouts of suicidality, mostly in my teenage years. And so I understand the impulse, but I also think that these obstacles that are placed in front of us, all of them are here to rise over it. And I don't think that I don't know, but I just see the mental health of the people that are, you know, around on this planet. I just see it kind of fraying, right? And So that's a real strong indicative of the shadow Pisces in our world. Like, look at how we treat mental health challenges, and we don't treat them as spiritual problems. We just write a prescription and then we're done with it, right? But even in the US now, you can't get your prescriptions on time, or you can't, like, certain people can't find certain medications that they used to take, right? So I would say that, like, a shadow aspect of Pisces is being very spiritually disconnected from the cosmos, from nature, from ourselves. Escapism and addiction is at an all-time high, especially in major cities, but really all over the place. I mean, even in rural areas too. And I think that this article reminded me of this book in the Bible, or this verse in the Bible. It says, UN declares war on dangerous conspiracy theories. The world is not secretly manipulated by a global elite. It's like, sure, Jan, right? So I think that this type of framework is potentially being set up to persecute people who have, like, a dissident perspective or a dissident thought, which is why, like, even if I don't disagree, or if I disagree with someone, I'm not championing their if somebody's getting censored or suppressed, even if I disagree with them, I know that eventually affects me, right? So this says also it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. So I think that, I just wanted to share that these are some of the shadow aspects of Pisces. And it's hard to, like, a lot of times, I think, especially, like, kind of barely grazing out of a very dark age. And, like, it's just hard to really tap into the purity of, like, a true spiritual essence. And so we see a lot more of our shadow side of Pisces, escapism, addiction, hysteria, right? We see a lot more of that in our world. We don't see a whole lot of, like, we're not in, like, a temple culture, right, where, like, mysticism is encouraged to expand. So enough about the world, enough about people outside of you. Since this lecture is on helps for you and more about, like, what's going on internally, I have laid out a couple of Bible verses that I think are interesting and relevant. These two are very similar, Acts 2:17 and Joel 2:28. So I'll just read one of them. This says, "And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, fresh, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, and old men shall dream dreams." So all this is to say is that, I believe that this is a time where, like, we're really reclaiming a lot of, like, our original gifting that we came in here with. I think that we're, like, kind of returning to, we're returning to a lot of our natural ability, but it's like with the fullness of the spirit comes greater responsibility, right? Because not only are you engaging in a quicker level of manifestation, where it's like you want to be really conscious of, like, what you're thinking about and, and feeling about, but also because, it could be like a personal halls of a mentee in some way, where, like, what you fear, you create. So I think that this is just, it's like the fullness of the spirit is definitely, I think, coming. And I think between now and 2026, like, if you look back at, like, from 2018, for example, just because it's, like, a random number that sticks out in my head, until now, you'd notice that you've grown a lot. And then a lot has changed, and you probably up-leveled in various areas of your lives, right? So, kind of moving into, like, between now and 2026, a lot of us are not going to recognize like our present experiences, because we're going to be like acclimating to more of our spirit coming into our bodies. And that's what I believe the opportunity is. And with that, what I was saying about like that instant manifestation kind of, having easier access to bring things about for yourself. When I read this Bible verse, it's Revelations 18:4. It says, "Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues.'" And so when I see this, I think to come out of her, meaning come out of Babylon, meaning your mind, like to pull your mind out of like a lot of those strange magical compartments that the world frankly has us in. I think this is like a little bit of a coming out of the world, and not in a unbalanced or ungrounded way, but I think that there comes a point where it's not optional throughout these next few years. So if you think I'm extreme for saying that, just wait. Okay, so yeah. Oh, and I wanted to share really fast before we get too much further into this, is that I want to share that the reason that I bring in Bible verses is because I believe that the Bible was written by like mystery initiates. So there's some really positive, really relevant gems in the Bible. So I just wanted to share that too, that I don't necessarily think that it was written by God himself. And I don't believe that at all. But yeah, so, but I do think that there are gems, and like when I read it, it appears itself to me to be very multidimensional. So, all right, let's get into dual signs and polarity. So Gemini, Libra, and Pisces are the dual signs. So part of the opportunity with Saturn coming into any one of those signs is to resolve your polarity. And there's also a measure too of like, we're not going to be super like, this isn't like an alone time type of lesson. Saturn and Pisces, I think actually Saturn and Pisces is like, how much can you trust the universe, and how much can you trust the people that are around you to have your back and to have you and to carry you potentially if you need it? How ready are you to carry them? Like there's a lot of emphasis, I think, in relationships with Saturn and Pisces on reciprocity. So obviously you can see that, Pisces are the two fish swimming in the opposite direction. And there are a couple of polarities that I wanted to bring up with this that I just think it's important to keep in mind. So Jung has a concept called Eros and Logos, which is creative chaos versus divine or lawful order. And I believe that that with these two things, chaos and order, there's like naturally occurring chaos and order, and then there's like engineered, manufactured chaos and order. And I think that like, so there's 4 things total, right? And I believe that we'll see all of those in the next 3 years, that it's like, how comfortable are you in chaos? Some people are more comfortable in chaos, some people are more comfortable in order. I know for myself recently, like about a week ago, I kind of cut off like the one, and at least in my mind I cut off like the one source of drama or strain in my life. And it's funny because, just to be super open about it, I feel like I put it off for a while because my life is pretty orderly, right? Like I have a pretty peaceful existence out here. So, I have to do something to keep it chaotic and keep it a little, to keep me on the hook or whatever. Not really, but I think it's just good to like really examine your own personal relationship to these things and to look at your personal balance and level of being able to hang when it's chaotic or when it's like extremely orderly too. So our task is not to bring order out of chaos, but to get work done in the middle of chaos. I like that George Peabody said that, and that is the whole thing. is when you're navigating situations that do necessitate surrender, because Saturn in Pisces does necessitate surrender for all of us. Like, is how can you like keep it moving? Like, how can you keep it pressing? How can you chop wood and carry water, right? That's one of the questions. So one of the other polarities that we're going to become extremely familiar with is the energy of organic or real or natural versus artificial and synthetic or fake, basically. So what I want for you guys to do is to get really used to looking at something carefully, right? So when it's something happening in the world, when it's something happening in your life, there's a certain frequency that feels synthetic, that feels like underlying, like something is off, you know, it has a sound, it doesn't sound right, you know? So a lot of you have been noticing that like on the world stage, there's a lot of things that have that feeling, right? The synthetic, like creepy feeling. And I think that the more that you can really recognize that distinction, the more that you can trust yourself and what you see and kind of like know and understand what to do and how to navigate this. And then another polarity that just kind of came to me as I was writing this was thy will versus my will. So I'm going to clear something up for people, and you can call me a Satanist if you want, but you know I'm not, so I wouldn't, you know. It's like the whole do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So that does not mean, by the people who wrote it, that does not mean do what you want, do whatever you want, right? That's not what that means. It does not mean just like go nuts, like, right? Do whatever. You can have your cake and eat it too. This is life. It's your experience. Just go for it. Who cares if you hurt anybody? Like, no, that's not what that means. Do what thou wilt means to do physically, like to take action on what your will is. Okay, so do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is not necessarily, it doesn't have to mean service to self. It just means that your intention, your thoughts, your visualization, your action, and your conviction, like all of those things are lined up and like doing the same thing, which is what somebody who is actually connected to God, that's what their life is like, right? You know, I mean, obviously past certain point, like there's a level of congruence between someone's thoughts, words, actions, wishes, all of that stuff, right? So, you know, I'm not necessarily saying that you should discount your will. I think our will is going to be extremely necessary in the coming 3 years, like for us to, you know, I think it's us. I think we are the saviors. I think we are the ones that we have been waiting for, right? So, I loved this quote: when we stop playing God, God can play through us. So the reason that I brought this up is because, you know, I have a magic practice, and I know a lot of people that are watching this also have a magic practice. And there can be this strong desire that comes in to control your world, to control it, like to make things happen. And obviously, you know that if you cast a spell or if you do some type of working and then you want to like leave it alone, you want to set it and forget it, right? Sometimes, and your spirit knows, that's connected to the Godhead, like, so it's like your Godhead, and then your spirit knows which of these, like, you know, your spirit knows what's right for you, in other words. So sometimes when you're trying to really make something happen, but it's not happening, there's a reason for it. And so part of this Saturn in Pisces transit is balancing thy will versus my will, understanding the times, like kind of understanding the situations where we need to stand up and we need to be really strong within our will, and we need to trust our will and trust ourselves. But there's other times where we'll benefit from a high degree of surrender, just like letting, you know, letting go and letting God, so to speak. So this is Rudolf Steiner. He is a German mystic from the early 1900s. And he rebelled against theosophy. This is the Theosophical Society symbol. As you can see, there's a lot of interesting things going on there. So he left theosophy and created anthroposophy, which is esoteric Christianity. And I feel that there's one of his main prophecies, because of course Rudolf Steiner has a bunch of different things going on. He has waldorf education. He has like biodynamic farming. He had a lot of different ideas, and also came up with this massive sort of like accumulation of lectures for us, because his prophecies are very relevant to this moment. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ahriman, Lucifer, and the Christ dream, because I think this is one of the most helpful keys possible available to us to write out these next 3 years with Saturn and Pisces. So this is Ahriman. In the Zoroastrian religion, this is the villain. This is like the opposite of God in that tradition. So it's also the demon or daemon, you could say, or the entity or the impulse behind scientism, technology, materialization, compartmentalization. So all of the institutions and even the religions, I would say, are pretty detached, pretty Ahrimanic, and pretty much like mental. Ahriman is very mental and benefits from you seeing the world as just chaotic, random happenings between biological life forms, right? That's a very Ahrimanic, like the physicalism, materialism, those are extremely Ahrimanic philosophies. And yeah, you can kind of see how that spirit has taken over today with all of these scientists playing God, and rather than like sitting down and like having themselves a meditative moment, they decide to literally use technology to split the fucking dimensions apart. That's pretty Ahrimanic to me. So we all interact with these impulses, these beings. We all have some of them within us. It's just the amount and the balance. So Rudolf Steiner wanted to specifically say, and I think I included that in here, that I would say like he wanted things to be a little bit more of a balance between these two poles, Ahriman and Lucifer, which happens in the heart. And I'll talk more about that too. So Ahriman stores himself in the liver and is connected to this, like, really atheist, scientific, medical system. Like pretty much like the medical system from the 1900s on has a lot of Ahriman, as well as the kind of like giving our imagination away to technology. Now technology can do everything that we can do, even things that we don't know we can do, but we can do, right? So these are some ideas of some of the ways that Ahriman has infiltrated our society in somewhat of an imbalanced way. So actually, I wanted to share this with you too, that according to Steiner, this is the Antichrist, that this being will take a body at some point, probably any day now. So, and also I think it's interesting because this happens by massively altering or augmenting our body. So you can look to the last few years for the pretext of Ahriman taking a body. So, obviously, like this idea, even like the idea of sickness itself and death, like we know it to be today, I believe is an overlay that, needn't necessarily be there. But where we are in density, obviously, we do die, we do experience sickness, right? And so the medical system of today and the way that it views people as symptoms, right? That is very Ahrimanic, because Ahrimanic wants to compartmentalize and, split apart into tiny observable, compartments, everything. So the way that humans have been taught to think of aliens as ETs, physical ETs, and as craft to look like this, you know, I would say that's also Ahrimanic. Oops. Oh no. And I think as well, some of these figureheads like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson and all of these organizations listed and many more, including NASA, really help us to see the world through their eyes rather than our own. Yeah. Okay, so getting into Lucifer. Lucifer brought us actually things like gnosis and the mysteries, and that's wonderful. So, like I said, there's a place and a space for Ahriman, and there's a place and a space for Lucifer, but our job is to retain balance and to stay in the center of ourselves, which is the material that Steiner gave us on Christ. So I'll get into that as well. So while Ahriman is the force of materialization, Lucifer is the force of dematerialization. So if you think about the way that a lot of like the ascension languaging has you feeling like rather than pulling your spirit deeply into your body, that you should go up there and go wherever, go up and out there, you know? That would be something to look at. You know, why is it always like us going there? Where are we going? Like, what is the intention of kind of keeping our focus and our gaze, considering that the most powerful moment is this moment? You know, what's the intention behind keeping our gaze looking at something that's out there? Just trust the plan, or like trust that you're going to get raptured, or trust that you're going to go to new earth. Like, these are the ways that the Luciferian sort of belief and ideology kind of gets in there. And I also think, you know, I definitely, obviously, like I said, I've had a magical practice, and though I don't identify necessarily as a pagan, there's nothing wrong with that if you do. But I've noticed that some of the ways that people tend to practice their magic are using those entities and those beings, the pagan gods, as like ATM machines. Like, okay, I want this. Okay, I want this. And you don't think about what you're giving up in exchange, really, unless you've thought that part out. So I just want to share too that like that's just how Lucifer energy looks when it's out of balance. And you know, when it's like running the show, he talked about how Rudolf Steiner talked about like the breath is what brings Lucifer like in and kind of like opens the Luciferian force within a person. It's the breath. And so he said, like, with breath comes questions, right? And so there's this place that like truthers, or like, you know, people who are seeking, can get really caught up in, which is like the, like, you know, constantly looking at information, constantly trying to know more, constantly like trying to figure it out, you know. And yeah, I think that that's like, it's how you use it. Like, you can illuminate the path for yourself, you can understand symbolism and mystery, but I think it's just like how you're working for it, because, or working with it, because it's not the time to go with Lucifer. That it right now, according to Steiner, this is like we're in the beginning of the Christ event, and the Christ event, it happens alongside Ahriman, the Antichrist, which is sort of like the counterbalance to the Christ event. And the Christ event is something that happens within our heart, right? So I don't know if you notice, and I'll explain more about that in a second, but so Ahriman is of the liver and Lucifer is of the stomach, right? So if you think about these two hemispheres of our brains, back to the whole polarity, duality thing, right? The dual signs. Think about these two hemispheres in our brains, and one of them has Lucifer and one of them has Ahriman. And then those trickle down into the stomach and the liver. Well, apparently, according to Steiner, in this time, there would be so much information, so much confusion, so much going on, that the only place that we can really trust is our heart. Like, it's just this one tiny little piece right here that can bring everything into balance for us. So So I'm going to read a couple of quotes from Rudolf Steiner about the Christ dream, and I'm going to include as well where you can access his lectures that you might want to look up for yourself, because very fascinating. And honestly, I've only been studying it for 2 years. So this is really just like a cursory, definitely meant for you to take the ball and run with it and like go look into more. But this says everything that man has to strive for as a result of the Christ impulse must be seen as similar to the equilibrious state of a pendulum. The point is that we should not only look at historical events, but we should experience the Christ within ourselves. We must discover something within ourselves that passes through stages similar to those experienced by Christ, at least spiritually, so that we can discover the Christ event within ourselves. The Christ event is something that happens within us. That's his motto, the Christ return or whatever, you know. So I recommend, you know, using this model in life. Rudolf Steiner said, "We men are thus in reality surface beings wedged between two entities that are no concern of ours. Our left man does not concern us, neither does our right man. What concerns us is the process that goes on between the two," right? So here we have on one side, we have Ahriman on one pole. Lucifer is on the other pole. And then straight down the middle, right in the center of your being, in the center of your heart, is where the Christ event happens and where the Christ impulse lives. So you can think about your heart as like a little dial. And the way that he describes it is just like aligning to that impulse, right? And feeling it and sitting with it in the center of your heart when you're in meditation and things like this. And also to just kind of like notice where Luciferic and Ahrimanic beliefs, especially ones that aren't proper, aren't correct, aren't in time properly, like you can kind of look to see, you know, like if, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example that's relevant, but Luciferian and Ahrimanic beliefs, if you look into this, you'll see that they're everywhere. And so when you catch one, you can just kind of say like, actually to yourself, I think this is how it really is. You know, I think this is how it actually is. And you kind of just like overlay what you know to be true onto your reality. Okay, so for the last slide in this, I wanted to go over a couple of dates. So 2011 until 2026, that's when Neptune is in Pisces, right? So we want to look at what happened for us in 2011, which is when Neptune and Chiron both came into Pisces, and it would have started us off in that way. There would have been some type of shift or change those years. And so just think about especially what you were struggling with between 2011 and 2018. Chiron was a longer term transit through Pisces. And, you know, a lot of the things that we see now, like some of the ways that we victimize ourselves, or like the ways that, you know, we're taught to think about certain groups, like, and other stuff like that, really came on the heels of this Chiron and Pisces and Neptune and Pisces transit. It's like a lot of those subconscious seeds were laid, right? So my question to you, or like piece of reflection to you, is like, what happened during those years? And maybe you can kind of look at that and see, well, okay, this happened and this happened, and you know, you can kind of see what house it's in for you. Let me know in the comments if you want. And yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this. I look forward to putting up my next lecture for you guys. So yeah, take care. Bye.